Thank you. Sorry, firstly, apologies for the scratchy voice. It's not COVID. I've been testing all night just to double check. It really is a cold, and thank God it is as well. So very nice to get to say hello to you. And I was thinking, as I looked at the agenda and all of the things that I could talk about, what would be a really interesting point of view from my perspective in terms of the transformation that we're doing at Kantar. And what I can't help but notice is that a lot of people use the terminology of digital, digitalization, and all those kind of things. I'd like to be a little bit provocative, if I can, and say I have absolutely no idea what that means. You know, for me, you know, the word digitization and digital is a phrase that you use so expansively, but has so little meaning. What I think is really going on is that we're living in a world where data is more widely available, it's more widely collected, it's used in a plethora of applications that we use to run our professional lives and our daily lives. And of course, as I think about the transformation we're driving at Kantar, I can't help but think that really, if we really want to drive that transformation, it really needs to come in the way that we bring together our data. So that's what I'm really going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what we think procurement data needs to look like, the journey that we're going through in Kantar, some lessons and some points of view that we have, and hopefully I can convey that message. In terms of who Kantar are, we were part of the marketing services business, WPP, up until the back end of 2019, and then we were acquired by the private equity company Bain Capital. But just to give you an idea of the scale of what we do over 70 million interviews a year in over 70 countries. And those interviews, I can see, were all a combination of fast-moving consumer goods users, fragrances, deodorants. Some of us shave, some of us don't. Well, all those brands want to get insight about how you and I engage with those products and services. So what do we think about them? What do we like about them? How do they stimulate sales momentum? How we can create moments of truth for those brands that they can then build into their marketing and their advertising services. That's what we do. That's in the DNA of our business. And the scale of what we do is really quite enormous. We do over $1 billion worth of digital transaction measurement on a daily basis. So you can imagine, you know, the scale of what we do is really quite enormous. So that's a little bit about the business. As we walked into COVID over a year and a half ago, I think as a profession, we're probably a little bit exposed, more so than we might like to admit coming off the back end of it. And I do know a lot of people do celebrate the Herculean efforts of what we collectively did as a profession to keep our businesses going. But in truth, I think what it also exposed is that our data was not in particularly good shape. And the data that I'm talking about from a Kantar perspective really is in three parts. So first part is just the spend data. And here's a challenge for you. When did you last update the taxonomy that you use in your business to measure the type of spend that you have going through your business? It's a simple thing, but it's incredibly difficult to do. And actually what's happening is that as businesses change their operating and their business models, what's happening is that the things they used to buy is changing into new things that they buy, but what they never do is go back and refresh their taxonomy. Very simple thing, but very few companies actually do that. The second thing is, if you look at our spend data, again, I can see some seasoned professionals in this room. I'm sure you all had the phone call from the CFO at the onset of COVID asking you what your commitments were with your supply chain. And I bet many of you would have struggled like I did about what that actually looked like. And again, you know, capturing that spend data and understanding your commitments is super, super important. So spend data is super important. Commercial data, understanding what your pipeline looks like is really important, because that's the essence of what procurement functions do. We bring commercial value to our business partners. And again, if you kind of scratch the surface and you try and think about the tempo that you have in your sourcing organizations, it's actually very difficult to know at any one point in time where you are in terms of contracting and measuring data. So again, you know, a really clear area that you need to work on and improve. And then the final thing is supply data. And this is something I do feel very strongly about. So again, if you were to go into your supplier data, I bet you could probably tell me who the supplier is. You could probably tell me where the invoices get paid. I'm pretty certain you'd have a contact on there, although I bet if you tried to reach out to that contact, you might find that they've left. So that's the kind of traditional procurement data we're talking about. But we know things have changed. And very importantly, if I was to ask you, well, what's the composition of your supply chain? You know, what do your suppliers represent? What communities do they come from? What's the measurement of diversity and inclusion that you have in your supply chain? I think you'd really struggle to measure that. And by the way, we're struggling to measure it as well. So we don't have the silver bullet on this, but my point is, we're talking, as we should, about diversity and inclusion these days. I actually think we've got a real challenge because whilst we might have the ethos in our business, we might try and change the shape and composition of the teams that we run and manage. I think we're doing very little actually in terms of the active measurement in our supply chain. And I will tell you, companies in the States are making some pretty audacious bets. So I think it's AT&T have declared that they're going to put 20% of their third-party spend through diverse and inclusive suppliers. Verizon have said 15%. Altria, which is the folks that make Marlboro cigarettes and things like that, they've made similar statements. And for a brand like Kantar that works with those brands, giving those insights, they are increasingly asking us the questions of what we need to do. So, you know, that is a really, really important part of how we need to begin to start marshalling data that historically has not really existed, but need to begin to start building it. So there's three bits of really important data that we're building. I would say that's all very well, but you need to build an ecosystem within your business to do that. So you've got to get really clear on what data do you need, but then you need to think about the management system that you're going to use. And I think you heard Ninian Wilson from Vodafone talk today about how they need to re-equip and the type of skill sets that they need within their procurement organizations to really make use of that data. It's no good having the best commodity managers in the world if they're not equipped to use data to help you drive the decisions that you're going to make in your supply chain. So you have to build that system, you have to align that data with the strategy of the business, and of course, like everything, you have to go into action. Now, why do I think data is super important? I think there's a number of reasons. First and foremost, self-evidently, we've been through an enormous period of disruption through COVID. There are far more eloquent people than I that can talk about what that's meant, but I think what it did do was expose that from a procurement perspective, collectively as a profession, and Kantar certainly was not on top of its game in terms of those three data sets, and we need to do more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I think this will be a theme that will amplify for years to come, we're seeing it with petrol, but it started with chipsets and it will be other things as well, is I think we are incapable without accurate data of measuring what the disruption is in our supply chain. And again, if you think about disruption, historically, it's been measured by, you know, has the delivery arrived? Did it leave the warehouse? And I think evidently what we've got to think about disruption now is far greater than that. It's than the manufacturing capacity there to meet the industry demand. You know, we've got to think about those macroeconomic trade wars, which I think we think have gone away, but I think they're still very, very prevalent. So disruption is very much there. In terms of diversity inclusion, I mean, you've heard me talk about this. There's a Tealbrook, for example, that are increasingly promoting their ability to capture really important data points about the composition of and the supply chains you use from a D&I perspective. But you know, if I look at North America, that's incredibly sophisticated. You can measure diversity through a number of lenses. You know, one is veteran, one is minority owned, one is women owned. If you look at the UK, that's very difficult to do. If you look at Europe, it's almost impossible. In an Asia Pacific, they've got a long ways to go before you can really begin to start measuring that. But the point is, this change is coming, and I really do think that it's procurement's role to begin to start capturing and measuring this data. Reputational impact, I mean, who would have thought 2 years ago that Boohoo would have been caught out using suppliers in Leicester that were paying minimum wage? It's a big reputational impact, that. And I think it was a failure in part in terms of them really capturing the data that they needed to in terms of the management of their supply chain. And in truth, I think many of our companies, no doubt we might be the case in Kantar, not too far away from finding sometimes that your suppliers that you use are not operating with the code of conduct that you need to. So we need to do more there. And then finally, I think a lot of the resilience that we had in COVID came about through the efforts of our supply chain and our suppliers. And I think it's a lesson and a reminder that our supply chains really do provide value greater than just the price we pay for things. So, they are real call out for action in my mind about why we need to really get serious from a procurement perspective in terms of pulling this data together. And again, what I would say, and as I said at the start of my presentation, if we're not serious about this, then I don't think you can be really serious about using the phrase digital transformation. Where are we on the journey from a Kantar perspective? Well, we separated from WPP in the latter part of 2019, and we've done some basic things. We started off with, hopefully you can see this. No, you can't. Okay. Well, we started off with the taxonomy refresh, then we started putting in terms of the dashboards, then we put in terms of spend compliance, really making sure we're using the vendors that we like. We've deploying Cooper. We've started with source to contract. We're just about to go with the Cooper risk management module, and then we'll be doing procure to pay in the latter half of next year. The source to contract and the risk management modules are really interesting because one of the points I would implore all of us to understand is that data is a very fluid resource, and it's one that you've got to keep nurturing and developing and investing in. And I think the mistake that a lot of organisations make is they fire and forget. They do a lot of stuff offline in Excel spreadsheets, it passes the audit, and then they walk away and they forget about it. And if you think of, as I say, data as a really fluid resource, I think you've got to constantly keep nurturing it, developing it, and putting it into your management practices to take advantage of it. So that's the journey that we're on. Kind of what are the lessons that we've learned? Well, first one is we started with no procurement technology at all. And if you heard me say, we're slowly rolling out Cooper. But I would say that this space has become incredibly active in the course of the past 2 years. It wasn't so long ago that if you looked at a Gartner 4-box matrix, it would point you to the big systems like SAP or Ariba. I think it's remarkable to me what's happened in 2 years, which is actually those big monolithic systems. I'm sure those suppliers won't thank me for saying that. To some degree, I think are losing pace. And what it really is about time to value. So there's a great choice of systems out there that deployed wisely can bring value to your corporation a lot quicker than maybe some of the more traditional ERP deployments, which is where people normally think they need to go to when they have these type of challenges. The second one is master data management. I mean, as a discipline, I really think it's important that businesses begin to really frame how they want to run and manage data in their business, and really build systems and processes that support that and begin to start installing the discipline. Now, of course, when you talk about data, discipline, systems, it sounds very binary and it doesn't sound particularly interesting. But again, and you might expect me to say this from a Kantar perspective, data is really the lifeblood of any enterprise these days. And if you don't invest in developing it and engage with your employee community, then I think you're missing a trick. You've got to be comfortable about kind of reporting and calling out performance with regards to data performance and data accuracy. Again, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the skills that you need to call things out with colleagues without either embarrassing them, but using it as a call of action. So, reporting and measuring what you're doing with data is mission critical. And then, in terms of installing that discipline, change management through the organisation, so important. As I said, I've seen many data initiatives fail because people see it's kind of very binary process. They've got over a deadline, they've achieved an audit criteria, they've ticked a box. And I think you've got to be quite thoughtful in terms of making sure that you engage with people so they understand that the use of that data needs to be installed in your management system so you use it all the time. The two things I do feel very passionate about is usability. Now, in this audience, the people accessing this online won't be able to see this. We've got a very diverse community of ages in this room, I think I can say, without embarrassing anybody. And we've got a generation of people that started their career with green screen technology. The younger people in this won't know what on earth I'm talking about. And then we've got a generation of people that have grown up with applications on iPhones, Samsung, just to be neutral, you could use those as well, where you do your eBay, your Amazon, you book your appointments, you do all those kind of things. And I think the challenge is that there is a generation of people coming into the workforce that are expecting their procurement technology to look at the same way they run their daily lives. And the evidence is out there that if you don't start really thinking through those user interfaces for your colleagues, your ability to get traction and usage is going to be very, very low. I'm not going to offer a promotion of a particular one tool or the other. I think I've told you who we're using. But I think making sure that the tools, systems and processes that you build have usability enshrined within them is going to be so important. And I really challenge all of us in this because, again, I've worked with things where you have a big call to action, you need to collect all your data, and suddenly you stick a procurement manager in front of an Excel spreadsheet with many different pages and data entry. That's not the type of user interface I would advocate. And then finally, adopt rather than adapt. I think I've got that the right way. The death of any quick deployment is this idea that you buy technology and then stakeholders say, we want to customize it. That's the death of any technology project in my mind. And the truth is that with all of the R&D that people are investing in procurement technology, there's absolutely no reason why someone like me needs to tell them how a procure-to-pay system needs to work. And quite the opposite. What I need to do is be focused on business change and business alignment. So I think that don't be afraid to take the technologies that are available to you, ruthlessly exploit those capabilities, and go for time to value, rather than whether it meets every business requirement. And I think in particular in procurement, sometimes we get a little bit hung up of thinking about the businesses that we work with are very unique or different, where in truth that's not really the case. So, our experience is, and that's what we're doing with the tools that we're deploying, is adapt very, very quickly, ruthlessly, to take advantage of all of the value that we're trying to bring to the business. And then the final thought I'd like to leave with you is that I really think data is a very fluid resource. Again, people do think it is a very binary thing, but in truth, actually, if you subscribe to any of the points of view that I've made, it is one of the most important resources that we have available to us. And it's in our gift to develop, marshal it, invest in it, and transform it. And my conviction would be that in doing that and doing it well, you are really giving a turbocharge to this terminology of digital transformation. So thank you for the opportunity to talk. That's all I wanted to say, just in a few words. So thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much. We've had questions flying in, and actually more coming in now. I'm going to try and get out of the way of this squeal. Actually more coming in now, so I'll try and get through all of them. Thank you, by the way, if you've been submitting questions. If you haven't got it yet, if you're watching online, I think you can already see a screen at the bottom where you can type in your questions. If you're in the room, if you just hold your phone up to this QR code, you can submit questions through that. And that's not just in this room either. You can do that next door as well, so if you've got any questions you'd like to ask there. The first one for me, really, is you talk about collecting data and using data, but where does it initially need to come from? Where's the buy-in? Is it people within your organization? Is it your suppliers?
Well, I think if you want to drive any kind of procurement transformation, it's for the procurement function to own that. So you need to begin to start setting up the capabilities to begin to start coalescing it, thinking about what you need, and taking ownership of it. And too many procurement people, I think, turn around and say, well, that's the finance people's problem, or that's somebody else's problem. And I really think it's for us to own and drive and transform. And I think, again, you saw what Ninian said from Vodafone. They have really taken this idea of data and analytics and really transform what Vodafone is doing. and Vodafone Procurement did that. No one told them to do it, so it's procurement's job.
Okay, there's a question highlighted in blue here. Have you thought about more defined supplier diversity models from nations like America to drive your agenda rather than wait for other regions to catch up? This was asked just after you started talking about social responsibility.
I mean, we have a big business in North America, so we are using the points that I made, the pivot points that we have, to begin to start directing our US spend into those suppliers. So the tools, techniques are available for us to do that. That's what we're doing. We are taking a similar approach and thinking about how we do that in the UK. But, you know, the point on data, you know, it requires suppliers to identify who they are, what they represent, and what their composition is. And if you don't have a means of either capturing that data, then it's impossible to begin to start saying that you're directing your spend into them. Some of those things are transportable from the US, but protected minorities as a definition of diversity and inclusion is a very, very national definition. So whilst the US define it as one thing, the UK define it as another, and other markets would define it accordingly. And our challenge within Kantar is how we can respond to those local market definitions through the paucity of, you know, standardization as well. So it's a real challenge. So yes, some of the things we're doing in the US, but not completely read over to the States, to the UK.
Oh, sorry, can we grab a microphone so that people listening on the stream can hear this person? Thank you.
Proxima. Stephen, have you thought, and where are you up to on this sort of integrating the various data sources? Because that feels to me like that's one of the most difficult problems to actually overcome.
It is actually, and that's a great question, Guy. Thank you for not telling me you were going to ask it, so I have to think about it on the hoof.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. So we're doing the Cooper Risk Management module, which is going to be where our residency is going to be on the status of our suppliers at any one point in time. I don't know if many of you look at that type of data on a regular basis. I do, and one of the things that has become very apparent is that the status of a supplier through the course of 12 months changes all the time. So what we're going to be doing is connect it in with a third-party database to begin to start refreshing our data, our supply data, with the status of those suppliers through things like, well, Dow Jones is one database. I'm not promoting it, but it's one that you can test what the status of the supplier is financially, reputationally, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly you're making that static supply data very active because you're constantly testing it and all those kind of things. What we will do, Guy, is begin to start then adding tags to our supplier descriptions, where we'll begin to start classifying them based on how they classify themselves as well, by the way. So you have to be quite sensitive to the fact that some suppliers choose to not want to identify as one thing or the other, and we need to be respectful of that. But we will then open that up through our data capture, and then we'll begin to start measuring that. So, you know, Cooper is going to be a great tool to allow us to solidify our supply data, and then we'll open our APIs to databases that are out there that allow us to kind of test what our suppliers look like. And it's evolving as well, by the way. So we're kind of learning as we go, because again, I think there's very few companies that have actually figured out how to do this at the moment. And we're taking a lot of advice from a lot of groups about how we should do this.
There are more questions on Slido. Has anybody else in the room got anything to ask while we know where the microphone is? No? Fantastic, okay. So one kind of recurring theme, and rightly so, is the environment and companies trying to reach net zero. You've talked about how you're using data to help with things like diversity and inclusion. And I'm aware that's not all you're talking about, but we've had a couple of questions on it.
Yeah.
Will you be using it to focus on sustainability, whatever your carbon goals might be?
Well, it's a really, really topical subject at the moment, because we are looking at what our, and let's frame it in its broadest sense, what our diversity and social inclusion strategy will be. That includes a component of our carbon footprint. But our business is really a people business. We don't have enormous data centers. You know, we use people, some of the third parties that are out there. So what we have is really buildings and things like that. So one of the things that we're just trying to be very laser-like as we kind of play out what we think our social inclusion, D&I, carbon footprint strategy is. We don't use this phrase called greenwashing, which I don't you may have heard of. Just everybody begins to start saying, well, they do everything for every environmental cause. And in truth, what we are doing in Kantar is being quite purposeful and making sure that the things that we commit to have a direct linkage to the things that we do in our business and our supply chain. So really what we're looking at is a very narrow carbon footprint through the buildings that we operate. And of course, like everybody, we're looking to measure that and think about how we can shrink it. And, you know, COVID has been a good exemplar for all of us, I think, in terms of how we can shrink our physical footprint but still act very successfully as a business. So kind of gives you a flavour of where we're leaning to.
Okay, and speaking of where you're leading to, you've already said that you're adding more modules into your systems. There's far more work clearly coming along.
Yeah.
Are you able to tell us about what the horizon looks like for you? So 5 years down the line, for example, where do you think you'll be?
I think I saw that question, yeah. Yes. Where does Kantar think it will be in 5 years' time? That's a very dangerous question to answer when you're owned by Bain Capital, by the way. So let me kind of take the Fifth Amendment on that. But what I will say is this. They are, and we are, very focused in transforming our business into one that provides our clients and our customers with really insightful, impactful data. We've seen some of those big shifts because we used to do a lot of data collection physically, and now we're moving a lot of that data collection online. But you can imagine, you know, brands are very, very thirsty for the insights that we can provide, because who can't be susceptible to some of the fake news that is out there these days? And brands, no more than anybody else, do want real insights and data-proven points of view that they can use to drive their commercial strategies. So that's what we're anchoring on, and we will increasingly focus on that. Our financial performance has been strong through the course of the past 18 months, and long may that continue. And I'm sure people would like to know a little bit more, but there's really nothing more to say at this point in time.
That makes perfect sense, Stephen. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your talk, and actually the number of questions we've had through, I'm sorry if we didn't get to yours, have been fascinating. So Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.